Eversolo was founded in 2017 as a child company of Xidu. Don't worry if you haven't heard about them. Eversolo started out with the DAC Z6 and the DAC Z8, brand new products from a fledgling brand. This was no stumbling infant though. Eversolo hit the ground at a full sprint. Their products had more finesse and polish than established brands like SMSL, Topping and FiiO. And then, Eversolo completely changed tack. They suddenly went from making desktop DACs to making high-quality hi-fi music streamers. The only things that didn't change were the quality of the design and interfaces. And that probably explains why there's so much buzz about this. This is the Luxsin X9 DAC and headphone amp. What's that got to do with Eversolo? Luxsin is another brand under that parent company, Xidu. In other words, they share the same DNA as Eversolo, and you can see it in the quality of their external design and in the interface. This thing is gorgeous and wonderful to use. It has some unique and thoughtful features too. What I keep getting asked in the comments, as you can imagine, is if it sounds good. And that gets a little bit more complicated. At $1,099 US, the X9 carries a fairly premium price tag, and that means fairly premium expectations. It was sent to me by Luxsin for review, but they have no influence over what I'm going to say here, and that's probably going to become self-evident in just a moment. The X9 has a resistor ladder for the volume control, and it uses the AK4499 and AK4191 DAC chips, both very premium options. It then uses the OPA 1612 op amps for the amplification stage, and they're not such a premium option. They're nice as far as op amps go, but maybe not the best choice at a product of this level. Let's park that thought for now though, and we'll come back to it later. Perhaps the coolest thing about the X9 is the extra features and functionality that it brings to the world of all-in-one DAC and headphone amp combos. The X9 features a line input, so you can use it as a headphone amp from say a turntable or a streamer. You would need a phono preamp for your turntable if that's how you're going to use it. But there are also a bunch of built-in audio customizations that I don't think we've ever seen before on a product like this. That includes things like an auto gain selection based on the impedance of your headphones, comprehensive subwoofer controls if you're going to use this as a DAC and preamp, crossfeed controls, three-way tone controls, some EQ presets, and even custom preset EQ settings for very specific headphones with a huge database to choose from. In other words, you can tell the X9 exactly which headphones you plugged in, and then choose from a number of different potential target tunings to get an EQ setting designed specifically for those headphones. If you love to use the recommended EQ settings from people like Oratory or Critical, then you've got it all baked into the X9 for the majority of well-known headphones out there. And it goes beyond just people like Oratory and Critical. The database is quite huge. There are some additional adjustments that I've no doubt missed so far, but you'll see them in the B-roll, and we're going to revisit this section a bit later for some more information. And it's this combination of features and controls that makes the X9 really unique. However, having nice features is one thing. Sounding fantastic, as an audio device should, is another. Before I tell you about the sound of the X9, I've got a really quick favour to ask. I'm making a push to try to reach 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. It's a big audacious goal, but that's what makes it fun. Right now, as I'm recording this video, the channel is a little bit over the 50,000 subscriber mark, and I want to start off by sending a huge thanks to each and every one of you that has subscribed. But then the other number that I also want to mention is that only 60-something% of viewers of this channel are subscribed, meaning there's 35% of you watching these videos that aren't subscribed. And so if you haven't yet subscribed to Passion for Sound, but you're enjoying this video or you've enjoyed my other videos, then please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. It makes a huge difference to the ongoing performance of this channel and my ability to make videos like this for you. And of course, if you find in the future that you don't need my videos, you can always unsubscribe later. So thank you again to all of you who are already subscribed, and thank you as well to all of you who just hit the subscribe button. It really means a lot. Now let's get back to the X9, where I began my testing of it as a pure DAC. The way the X9 is set up, you can use it as a preamp style DAC by using the volume control and that resistor ladder, or you can just max out the volume to get a line level output from the back of it. And the DAC in the X9 sounded great. What might be even more impressive though, is that all of those sound customizations we were talking about before are all available via the analog outputs regardless of the digital input. In other words, you can set up any of those customizations you want on the X9 when using it as a DAC and send them out to your external headphone amp, preamp, power amps, whatever you want. That's really cool, but it did also raise one shortcoming of the X9 for me. Knowing that you can use the various EQ settings to adjust the output using the X9 as a DAC made me wish I had the ability to set up my own custom EQ curves. If you want to use this as part of a speaker setup, that would be hugely helpful. As it is, you only have the choice to use the standard EQ presets, or the 3-band tone controls with treble, mids and bass. They're really the only things that are going to help you with a speaker setup. You can also use the presets for headphones, but they're very much specific to the headphone models. And so you can make some tonal adjustments to the sound coming from the X9 when using it as a DAC. But if you need a very specific tight peak or cut to deal with a resonance in your room, for instance, you can't do that here. Hey everybody, just a quick note. I'm in the middle of editing this video and I've just discovered a bit of an error on my part. There is actually an app available with the Luxsin X9 that's going to allow you to do all of the sort of custom parametric EQ settings that I wish that it had. Turns out it does. So disregard anything I say about it not having the ability to do custom EQ curves for speakers, etc. You can do that. It's all in the app and it's a really good app that works very easily. So that's now available, or has always been available. I just wasn't aware of it because when I looked at the quick start guide, there's only a tiny mention of it. So make sure if you get the X9 that you do also download the app. It's going to give you extra controls over the EQ. So that takes care of that. Any further mentions I make about it not having custom EQ settings for speakers, scrap that because it does. My final conclusions that you're going to see at the end are still mostly true. It just means that there's that little bit of a change in the fact that it does have the parametric EQ settings, and that's going to open up some great options for those wanting a headphone and speaker-based DAC with all of those other custom settings available. So just a quick error, sorry about that, and let's get back to the video. Either way though, I was still enjoying my experience with the X9, but I also felt I wanted more context, and you probably do too. Comparing the X9 with FiiO's K17 was an interesting experience. On first listen, the two were almost indistinguishable. Both of these use the same AK4499 and AK4191 DAC chip setup, and so it kind of makes sense that they would sound pretty similar. As I listened more though, I kept feeling like the X9 was just a little bit less available to me than the K17. It was like when I went from the K17 to the X9, all the musicians took a step back and went behind a sheer curtain. It was a very subtle shift, but it just made things less tangible, less lifelike, and as I said before, less available. The easiest way to put it is that the music felt more alive from the K17. And then I realized that the levels were not perfectly matched. It seems that the K17 outputs just a slightly higher voltage than the X9, and so I pulled back the levels on the K17 by just a couple of steps to balance things out. As soon as I got the levels perfectly matched between these two, I honestly couldn't tell the difference between them. And that's great. The K17 is an excellent DAC, we already know that from past reviews, and the X9 is right there with it as a wonderful sounding DAC. We were off to a great start. And so next up, I wanted to test the preamp performance. Unlike the recently reviewed DNA Alpha Pro, the line input on the back of the X9 works with both the headphone output on the front, but also the analog outputs on the back, making this a proper preamp. I took a line input from the Chord Dave DAC into the X9 and compared the sound running the Chord Dave direct to a different amp versus going via the X9 and then off to that same amp. And what I noticed when I included the X9 in the source chain was a slight reduction in the soundstage size when compared to having the Dave connected directly to the external amp. And there was also a slight drop off in the sense of transparency or resolution as well. That doesn't mean the X9 is a bad preamp, because we need to remember here it's $1,099 for DAC, preamp, and headphone amp with all those DSP controls. For that sort of money, the preamp in here is fine. But I did think it was worth noting that it's not completely transparent if you're going to use it after a higher end source. If you're going to use it to connect up to, say, a turntable with a phono preamp, it's going to do just fine. It's really only if for some reason you wanted to use a premium source that's then fed into the X9, it's going to degrade it just a little bit. And so all of this told me that the X9 needs to be viewed as a wonderful, hopefully high value, we're going to get to that, wonderful high value all-in-one device. It's jam-packed full of features and capabilities, it sounds great as a DAC, it's still looking like a good deal. And so let's think about it now in that same context, as an all-in-one, do-everything device, and let's revisit the FiiO K17 as another example of that sort of a device. Once again, both devices sounded very similar, and this time I was using headphones plugged directly into the X9 and directly into the K17. I think from memory it was the Focal Utopias, but whatever it was a high-end headphone. And so this time using the DAC and headphone stage of both devices, both were sounding excellent, but they were a bit different. And this time it wasn't about volume matching. The K17 sounds a little bit crisper than the X9, which means the X9 by comparison sounds just a little bit smoother. That's neither good nor bad, they're just a bit different. But what was noticeably different was the sense of sound staging from the K17, which was superior over the X9. The X9 seems to deliver a slightly fuller sense of bass. Not that it's enhancing it, but the bass seemed to have more foundation, more fullness from the X9. It's not like the two of these were worlds apart or anything, and it took me some time to really get my head around what was actually different. But to me, the K17 sounded more consistently natural, and that's mostly due to the soundstage, but also the delivery of the sound, the character of the sound as well. And my guess is that this comes down to something I alluded to before, which is the K17 is a fully discrete amplifier design, whereas the X9 is using those OPA 1612 op amps. As I said, a good op amp, but generally not as good as a discrete circuit. Often op amps can produce better numbers on paper, and that's why many manufacturers will choose to use them. But having better numbers on paper like THD and SINAD scores doesn't always mean it's going to sound better to our ears. And on this occasion, I think the K17 with its discrete design does sound better, to my ears at least. And I should clarify here that all of this testing was done with the various sound controls and adjustments on the X9 completely bypassed. And that's a really important point, because toggling the bypass on and off on the X9 does change the sound. With the DSP features bypassed, in other words, crossfeed, EQ, all those things, if you bypass those on the X9, the sound becomes more transparent and resolving. Activating that DSP, in other words, switching off the bypass on the X9, even with all the customization switched off entirely, that will still create a slightly smoother and less resolving sound, or less detailed sound. For many people, the customizations available in the X9 will be more important than that last 1 to 2% of sound quality, but I thought it was important to tell you this. If you're going to use the sound customizations on the X9, you are giving up a little tiny bit of sound quality. And so while we're talking about that, it's good to understand the value of the customizations in a bit more depth, to work out if you're happy to trade off a tiny bit of sound quality to get some of those customization controls. So let's talk through them now, before we come back at the end for one more comparison. The range of customization from the X9, as you probably already gathered, is powerful and comprehensive. There are adjustments like stereo width controls, which will give you a wider stereo soundstage. Crazy, I know. And expanding the soundstage with that control does have a noticeable impact on the width of the soundstage, but it will also flatten the soundstage a bit as well. It can be really fun to have a play around with, and you can dial it all the way from being a completely mono sound through to a normal stereo sound through to an extra wide stereo sound. So if you do get an X9, have a play and see what you like. Another of the settings that I mentioned before are some EQ presets. Technically they fall under what's called the style menu in the X9. And these are your regular kind of EQ presets like you see as called classical, jazz, pop, rock, that sort of thing. I personally found each of the settings I tried a little bit heavy-handed, but I'm also not a huge fan of using EQ in general, so you might love them. I personally didn't. I've already mentioned that there's a 3-band tone control with treble, mids and bass, and I also touched on the subwoofer controls, but I think it's worth knowing more about what you can do in the sub-control settings. Within that menu, you can adjust the sub cutoff frequency from 40Hz to 300Hz, and you can then adjust the steepness of those crossover curves in 6 decibels per octave jumps from 6 dBs per octave all the way to 36 dBs per octave. You can also boost or cut the output levels of the subs by plus or minus 15 decibels. And you can adjust the timing of the sub too. The timing options let you delay either your main speakers or your subs anywhere up to a 40 millisecond delay. That equates to a difference in placement between your sub and your main speakers of up to 13.6 meters. So I imagine that's going to be enough for pretty much everybody. And then the final adjustment for the sub is that you can send the outputs as a stereo or a mono output to the sub. That could be really helpful for those running a single sub setup or a dual sub setup where you want to keep them stereo. And from there we come back around to more headphone specific controls. There are the custom EQ presets that I mentioned before, where you can select from a range of EQ settings for your specific headphone, and those EQ settings are coming from some kind of audio community database. It's not been made clear exactly where, but I'm guessing it's something like the Opera database, like you can get access to in Roon. That means it should be an ever-growing list of headphones, and the X9 is wonderfully easy to update through Wi-Fi, so you're going to be able to quickly and easily get access to those as they're released and updated by Luxsin. And just to clarify, even though the X9 does have Wi-Fi connectivity, it's only for updates. There's no streaming built into the X9, that's an Eversolo thing. As for the functionality of using those EQ presets, I think it works pretty well now after a recent firmware update. Now when you access the menu and search for your headphones, you'll get the ability to skip through any of the available curves for that particular headphone, so you can decide which one you like the sound of the most before locking it in. Once you've selected the curve you like, your headphone will appear in the front menu of the headphone EQ settings for quick and easy switching later on. The only catch is you can only load one preset per headphone. So if you do have, say, Focal Utopias like I do, you can only have one curve loaded for the Focal Utopias. That front page menu will give you access to have multiple different headphones there. So for instance, I could have the Sony MDR-Z1R, the Focal Utopia, the Meza Elite, and the ATH R70X. Those could all be there. What I can't do is have two different tunings of, say, the Focal Utopias. But I think that's a minor issue, and what's more important is that you can switch between the different headphones you use as you plug in different ones. And while we're back on the headphone topic, this brings us to what I think of as the very best implemented feature on the X9, and it's crossfeed. I generally don't use crossfeed because I find that it messes with the signal too much, but I think the options on the X9 are some of the very best I've tried. Engaging any of the three options available will create a slightly richer, smoother mid-range, but they don't seem to kill the sense of clarity or transparency in the way that some crossfeed systems can. The result is mostly a shift in the sense of spaciousness, where it'll pull the sound less from being in your ears and more around in front of you, as well as a slight shift in tonality towards a touch of richness or warmth, but only a very small touch, and I think it's a net positive experience. And in case you're not familiar with crossfeed, what it's intended to do is replicate the experience of listening to speakers when you're listening to headphones. With speakers, both of your ears receive sound from both of the speakers, the left and the right. With headphones, each ear only hears the sound coming out of that channel. Crossfeed helps to selectively mix some of the frequencies from the left ear into the right and some of the frequencies from the right ear into the left. And that results in a sound that is more like listening to speakers. And if you've ever wanted to know information like that about some other audio-based topic, I've got something you might be interested in. I've wanted to create a training program for ages now. It's mostly written, but there's a problem. It's impossible to balance the level of detail so that it never gets too complex, but it also has all of the information that you might need to get you started on your audio journey. What would be more helpful is a targeted system where you can ask exactly the question you need at exactly the moment you need it and get an answer. I do try to stay up to date on the YouTube comment section, but it's not always the best forum for educational content. And then in addition to that, as the channel grows, and thanks for all your help, it's going to get harder and harder for me to stay up to date with the comments. That's already happening, you might have noticed. The good news is now I've got a better option. I've joined Minect as an audio expert, so you can reach out to me anytime you like and ask the question that you need the answer to. You're going to get a guaranteed response from me in the form of either a text response, a short video response, or you can even book a one-on-one video call with me to discuss what you need. It is a paid service, and that's how I'll be able to ensure that I can always prioritize my time to go towards answering your questions over there. That's going to be especially true as the comment section gets way too busy for me to keep up with. So if you want an answer to a specific audio related question, or if maybe you want an answer about how to set up your own YouTube channel, maybe you want me to record a short message for a fan of the channel, whatever it is that you would like to connect with me about, you can now do it on the Minect app. It's available on Apple, Android, and through a web browser. Just scan the QR code on the screen, or you can use the link in the description down below to connect with me anytime you like. You can also just go to Minect and search for me, Lachlan Fennan. So I hope to see you over there, and more importantly, I hope that I can help you over there. But for now, let's get back to the main video. And now let's wrap all of this up with one more comparison for the Luxsin X9, so I can hopefully help you to form a comprehensive opinion of it. Given that the X9 held its own when compared to the FiiO K17 as a DAC, I wanted to also try it with another hugely popular DAC in the LAiV Micro DAC. The LAiV Micro DAC is much closer to the price of the X9. It sits just under $1,000, and it is just a DAC. Obviously, if you want things like a headphone amp, volume control, and all those sound customization features, you're going to have to buy the X9, out of these two at least, because the Micro DAC offers none of that. It is just a DAC. But for those of you that might be thinking of buying the X9 as a DAC, and then just having the headphone amp there as a bonus, let's talk about the comparison. Just like the FiiO K17 does, the X9 took the fight right to the Micro DAC. Where the Micro DAC proved its worth though, is that it does produce a greater sense of space around each sound. And it's especially stronger when you start to think about the depth in the soundstage and the layering it's able to create. On the other hand, the X9 delivers a slightly flatter soundstage, which brings the sense of energy and immediacy forward to the listener. Some people will prefer that presentation and feel like the X9 is more detailed and transparent. How I hear it though, is that the same details are in both presentations, they're just brought more forward from the X9 versus being spread out around the soundstage in the case of the Micro DAC. As it stands, both are excellent and kind of hard to choose between when you're thinking about them just as pure DACs. Obviously they are different, so you need to think about what your preferences are, and then of course the X9 does a whole lot more, so that factors in too. And that brings us neatly to a conclusion that's not actually so neat and tidy. The X9 is an excellent DAC and headphone amp, but it's not clearly better than the slightly cheaper FiiO K17, which can also do limited streaming duties. The extra features of the X9 are definitely compelling, but they don't really help you as much as they could if you're going to be running it with a speaker setup. I also think it's a shame that engaging any of those DSP settings on the X9 does noticeably degrade the sound quality, but as I said before, it is only a tiny shift. And so all of that prevents me from being quite as excited about the Luxsin X9 as I am about its sister products from Eversolo. It's not that the X9 isn't great, I just don't quite get as excited because it's a little bit hit and miss. And so if you're not going to use the sound customization features on the X9, I probably think I'd steer you towards the Micro DAC from LAiV if you just want a DAC, or the FiiO K17 if you want an all-in-one. However, if you want a DAC and headphone amp and preamp with amazing sound customization controls built in, especially for headphone users, I don't think anything else comes close to the X9. I don't even know if anything exists that does what the X9 does. And so in that sense, it's great, and it does sound fantastic too. And do keep in mind, it is so easy to toggle the DSP features on and off that you can quickly choose between absolute perfect sound quality or having a bit of a play with the sound. And now at the time of this review, availability and distribution I'm not entirely clear of for Luxsin and the X9, so I'll see what I can do in terms of finding links to put in the description down below to make it easy for you, or if you've decided that maybe this isn't quite the device you were looking for, then make sure to watch the video I've pinned here at the end, because that's the product that I think is the absolute best sounding all-in-one DAC, headphone amp and preamp at around about the price of the X9. So watch that one next, but for now, a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and of course to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.